Welcome to Hardfire Media, libertarian issues in focus on Brooklyn free speech television. My name is Derek Sacerdote. I'm the host of Hardfire. Thank you for tuning into our show. Today we have on our show Cameron Weber,
Hello.
an economist, a historian, to discuss some of his findings on Adam Smith, the famous economist whose Wealth of Nations in 1776 is seen as the starting point of modern economics.
Right.
Smith is also seen as the founder of free market economics, whatever that means.
Yeah, what does that mean? Yeah.
Today we're going to discuss the legacy of Adam Smith and why he should not really be considered a free market economist.
Yeah.
Cameron, welcome to our show, and I'm excited to hear about your research.
Okay. Derek, right. Thank you for coming on Hardfire, and in this hot, steamy summer of 2019. Yeah, it's pretty hot in Brooklyn right now.
It's rough. I can't.
No small talk first.
I can't look nice in August. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Yeah, that's right.
Cameron has been studying and teaching economics for the last 10, 15, 20 years or so. I lost track.
Yeah.
We're really excited to see what you have to say.
Yeah, right. So.
And we're going to maybe critique
some
of Adam Smith's work.
Right. We're going to talk about Adam Smith. So everyone's heard about Adam Smith, or most people have heard about Adam Smith. He's known as a free market economist, and they even had ties made up of Adam Smith, and he's like the straw man that people have created for free market and free trade. And in certain ways that's true, but in certain ways it's not true. And so what we're going to do is, as we want to do, debunk people in terms of analytical egalitarianism. We're all the same, whether you're a street porter or a philosopher. That's something Adam Smith said. So he was an egalitarian in that way, a philosopher in that way, but he also, well, why don't we just start with what Adam Smith is known for?
For lay people who don't know.
Yeah,
we're gonna knock him off his pedestal, but first we're gonna
build up the pedestal.
Put him up there. Okay. Good.
Why does he have a pedestal in the first place?
I mean, I went to high school. I went to college. I knew of Adam Smith.
Yeah.
He was the free trade guy.
Yeah. Well, great. So Adam Smith was writing in his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, was 1759, and then the one that he's most well known for is The Wealth of Nations, 1776.
That's a while ago.
Yes, yeah, that's 220 years ago, something like that. So anyway, he is famous for not referencing previous writers. Some writers he's known for referencing, especially within his intellectual milieu, but he also copied from the French physiocrats. And the French physiocrats, they're the ones that invented the term laissez-faire, laissez-passer. In other words, laissez-faire economics. And so Adam Smith built upon that school of the laissez-faire economics. And basically he built a system against what then was the divine right to rule and mercantilism, where the whole idea was that the state, in this case the crown and the church, would try to export as much as possible so that they could get gold into their bank accounts so that they could fight religious and territorial wars. And they did that by granting monopolies to like the East India Company and stuff like that, slave trade, the South Sea Corporation. And so Adam Smith was against this idea that wealth was created through exports and by granting monopolies, and that it was that gold in the state coffers is not seen as wealth, but in fact it's trade amongst individuals that allows individuals to become wealthy, and then individuals seeking their own self-interest then is a tide that raises all boats, and everyone, by pursuing your own self-interest, everyone becomes more wealthy.
So if I understand you correctly, like today, we're talking about the philosophical difference between those who feel that economy should be controlled, should be run, versus it should be something that is allowed to happen. That's the split.
Exactly. In other words, it's the rights of man, individuals, instead of the divine right to rule. And Trump is a neo-mercantilist, right? He believes exports are better than imports, and But Smith had two books.
Let's have you 1 second. Can you explain or debunk that reasoning that exports are? Why would someone even think that exports are better than imports? What is it based on?
What it's based on, the fact that you used to earn gold back during the gold standard, during mercantilism prior to the Great Depression. We were on a gold standard, and then so any exports would be paid for by gold. And then if the state had that gold, then they could create war.
So in other words, as a person, I think of it in human terms. I'm selling stuff, I'm getting money.
Yeah.
I'm buying stuff, I'm spending my money. So that's not good. That's looking at it like that.
The idea is that the money should go to the state so that the state can then build the nation
and not bring in stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I got you.
And they do that by holding down the living standards of individuals.
Right.
And then that's exactly what Trump's policy is, holding down the living standards of individuals by suppressing trade in order to well, in Trump's case, grant special favors to special interests, which is what Adam Smith was against, was giving certain monopolies to certain people.
Not to be clear, not only Trump.
Yeah,
he's the face of it right now, but he is not only Trump.
That goes back to Keynesian economics.
Okay,
Keynesian economics.
Just making sure.
Yeah. So it was Adam Smith, seen as this free trader, and then Hayek and all the people following on up until the Great Depression, when then it became this beggar thy neighbor, trying to export more than your neighbor by devaluing currency, and it got really bad. But so Smith had two books, The Theory of Moral Sentiments in 1759, and that book was about personalized relationships, about how we treat each other, who we know. We want to earn their respect. We want to be praiseworthy. We want approbation, and there's an invisible spectator who guides our behavior towards moral ends, and that's the 1759 Theory of Moral Sentiments book. Then he comes out 15 years later, in 1776. He comes out with Wealth of Nations, which is not about approbation and praiseworthy behavior, but it's about trade, meaning that the only role for the state is, allegedly under his myth over time, the only role for the state is to enforce property rights and contract rights to allow trade to occur. And so then people say, that trade and wealth creation is based on self-interest, which is the opposite of the theory of moral sentiments.
Right. It sounded like it was very moralistic.
Yeah.
And then he shifted into more of a pragmatic argument that
moralistic versus pragmatic. Yeah, I like that. Right. So people call that, philosophers of economics call that the Das Adam Smith problem, or the Adam Smith problem, that he had these two books, and these books seem to be opposed to each other.
I can see that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But in fact, that's not the case. The case is that the first book is about personalized relationships in your local communities. This, in other words, we started as hunter-gatherer tribes, and we knew each other. We knew who the best trader was. We knew who the best sower was. We knew who the best fire maker was, the best hunter, right? And so that was personalized relationships where we shared things in common, more or less. And then as you started to trade with the other, then you had a different set of depersonalized relationships. So the level of analysis is different between personalized and depersonalized relationships. So there really is no problem. It's just a level of analysis that you're talking about.
If I could extend your analogy, maybe today, for example, we wouldn't have a personal relationship, but I could say read reviews of a certain product, a certain store. A certain buyer review on eBay. Like this person always pays. This person never pays.
Exactly.
Things like that.
Yeah, that's reducing information costs a lot. Yeah, that's the new economy. That's something that Adam Smith couldn't even fathom.
You couldn't imagine that.
Yeah, because right, you can trade with people in India,
and you can have some sense of how they are. Their social score, as we say now.
Yeah. And so that's a different thing. The social score is the Chinese. What's that? Social engineering to see how much they support the state.
Right, but I mean, we do it anyway, even without the government. We kind of still do it.
Well, for consumers,
it's
different than the Stasi spying on your neighbor kind of social score. But that's funny, Derek. I appreciate that sense of humor.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Adam Smith, then he had these. So the first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, was about people act in a praiseworthy manner. They want the approbation or respect of their peers and their colleagues and their friends. The second book, Wealth of Nations, is about self-interest and trade, and that we all have a tendency to trade, and individuals trading with each other raises the standards of living of everyone. So that's what Smith's most well known for, are those two ideas. And then we have that fallacy of the Adam Smith problem, when in fact he's looking at two different levels of relationships. Mm-hmm. So here's a quote from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. It is his own advantage indeed, and not that of society, which he has in view, but the study of his own advantage naturally, or rather necessarily, leads him to prefer that employment which is most advantageous to the society. As every individual, therefore, endeavors as much as he can to both to employ his capital in the support of domestic industry, and you'll see that he's prioritizing domestic industry already over international trade. Yeah?
No.
Yeah. And so to direct that industry that its produce may be of the greatest value, every individual necessarily labors to render the annual review of the revenue as society as great as he can. So you're already getting a GDP or economic growth base. So they say that everything is in Adam Smith. In other words, if you're an economist working today, every idea that we're talking about, except for your social score now, which would be approbation or praiseworthy behavior, is in Adam Smith. And if you can't find something in Adam Smith to make the point that you're trying to make, then you're not a very good economist.
I mean, what you just read sounds kind of like a Democrat. I mean, he sounds like a Democrat to me anyway, because you're
you mean like of the Democrat Party?
Yes, like as like a capital D, as in I'm running my business not because I want to make profit or feed my family or buy a house, but I'm running my business because my business will,
because it's a greater good to society.
Will help society.
Exactly.
And that's like a secondary motive that maybe is less efficient than just trying to make money.
Right. So let me just see what you think of this. The natural effort of every individual to better his own condition, when suffered to exert itself with freedom and security, is so powerful a principle that it is alone and without any assistance not only capable of carrying on the society to wealth and prosperity, but of surmounting 100 impertinent obstructions with which the folly of human laws too often encumbers its operations. Though the effect of these obstructions, meaning state obstructions is how it's read, is more or less either to encroach upon its freedom or to diminish its security.
He's taking some steps towards capitalism, and he definitely different than the previous quote you read. But essentially, if you're pursuing your self-interest business-wise, you will naturally bring about a better result for society, because you're trying to create
a product that people want to buy.
Service that, that's how I'm hearing what you read.
Yeah. So that is what Adam Smith is known for, and so
are you saying the framing of his work makes him sound better, and the analysis makes it sound clearer and better than the original writing?
Well, I guess what I'm saying, and I agree with Jacob Viner, whose work I've been looking at. I mean, I've read Theory of Moral Sentiments and Wealth of Nations are about this thick, right? So what I'm doing right now is researching what other writers have written about Adam Smith's interventions, and then I'm going to go back and go through minutely of all details, and most of the writers say he's inconsistent, right? So he's inconsistent, not because of the Adam Smith problem, but because, like you said, on the one hand, he's got this good of everyone, and on the other hand, he's got the individual self-interest.
I mean, the good of everyone is in how we read the theory, but it's not the motivation. It's more like the result.
Yeah. Right, it's an emerged property, an unintended consequence. Yes, an emerged unintended consequence, which is what the entire body of free market economics is about, is how do we get these good institutions in society and all this wealth creating without a central planner, or despite a central planner.
I feel like the writers and economists that maybe have worked from Adam Smith have gradually kind of given him credit for their own modifications of the original theory.
So right. So we've also done on Hardfire, we've done a couple shows on why it doesn't really matter if you export if you import more than you export, as long as you have a sound rule of law and good monetary and fiscal policy, and people are willing to hold your currency, well, then you can run an indefinite trade deficit like the United States has.
Now can you put that into, the average person when they hear this kind of discussion?
The dollar's stronger than the peso. The dollar's stronger than the euro.
I think this confuses people because they don't look at it. They look at it in the way that their own home, for example, or their own finances. They make it sound like, we're buying more than we sell, and well, how could we not go great into debt if we do that? That's how it sounds to.
Well,
when it's that way.
That's very good. Let's go back to the household home.
Okay.
About it.
If you could put it as a household metaphor, this whole situation.
Wealthy people don't need cash, right? Because they live on credit all the time. You go to the store, you get your fancy shirts at the fancy store, and
but they always have an income that will sustain that.
Or
credit.
A perceived income that'll sustain it. Yeah.
Or the potential to make that income.
Yeah. Which is good in household terms. Is good credit.
Mm-hmm.
Good credit.
If you have a track record of good credit, then
exactly.
So it's only a problem when you cease to be able to make good on those obligations.
Exactly. For example, the United States rule of law has always seen as one that does not confiscate property, and of course that's changed a lot over the last 10, 15 years, eroding. So that's why the dollar. Why the Chinese central bank is no longer buying dollar-based debt is because the rule of law is disintegrating in the United, is breaking down, and our principles of free trade are breaking down. And I hate to say it, but when President Obama nationalized General Motors, that was the first time in American history that private bondholders' rights were violated. So that to me is a big flag.
That was a major step away from the respect to our currency.
Yeah, from our good credit rating. Yeah. So, what I wanted to say then is, so we've got a list of these different interventions that Adam Smith that counteract his image as a free market economist, and I recently attended an economics conference in Valencia, Spain, where a friend of mine who I thought was a free market economist got up and he said, yes, we're all free traders, going back to Adam Smith, except for three particular circumstances. And these exceptions, and once you start making exceptions, it's a slippery slope.
It seems like it's not free trade anymore to me. Once you make even one exception.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope to when do the exceptions end. Yeah. So one of the exceptions, and this is in Adam Smith, is the national defense exception. In other words, you would protect local industry if it's necessary for national defense.
As in, it's so important that we have to not
protect the technology.
Don't allow it to be at the whim of
free trade
economy.
Yeah, free trade,
mm-hmm.
and other countries' trade policies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you get iron, steel, coal, automobiles, aircraft. All of these things are considered national defense. That's
a lot of things.
It's a lot of things. Like when does it end? I know.
Because there's so many things. It's tied to so much. Yeah.
So for Adam Smith's intervention was wool producers.
I mean, we don't think of wool as defense, but probably
for uniforms.
In that century, yes.
Well, no. Yes. Well, believe it or not, the United States has a wool fund.
Really?
We highly subsidize our wool fund for the uniforms, which goes all the way back to Adam Smith.
We have laws. We don't really get rid of them. They just stay.
Yeah. So the idea of subsidizing the wool fund that we all laugh at, or at least people of my age laugh at, it goes back to Adam Smith, and so that's the national defense exception to free trade. And for Smith, it was these things called the navigational acts, which still exist, which means that if you have a trade between, say, Boston and Honolulu, that trade has to be done on a ship that's flagged American. And so what that does is that builds up the sea power capacity, the navigational capacity, Navy capacity. England at the time was a big empire, Navy-based empire. So Smith supported these navigational acts, which we have today in the United States. we have these navigational acts through today in the United States that you have to be a flagged American carrier to go from one American port to another, which is granting monopolies to American flag carriers.
That seemed like that was an issue. Wasn't that an issue in Puerto Rico recently?
Exactly.
Yes.
Puerto Rico, Hawaii,
Yeah.
and Alaska. You know, the non-lower 48s are concerned about that because it makes costs so much higher. Trade costs so much higher.
Being that they're islands surrounded by water.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like England.
Yes, yeah, like England, yes. So what other exceptions did Adam Smith
Right.
have?
So we're talking about Adam Smith, who was seen as this free market economist. We're talking about all these exceptions that he has to this free market. I mean, his philosophical system against mercantilism is a good idea, right? And the individual rights over the rights of the state, but he has a lot of exceptions to the free market. And we talked about the national defense exception, the navigational acts, which are last through today, and the slippery slope. Like I remember my dad when I was studying mathematics, in PhD level mathematics for the. I'd go in, I'd buy 10 Chinese pencils for $1. Burning up a lot of pencils doing math. And my dad was like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen if we have a war with China and we're not making our own pencils?" So my dad would have the pencil exception to national defense, right?
I mean,
Sorry, Dad.
I understand where that's coming from.
Yeah.
The feeling that you don't want to rely on a country that you might be an enemy,
right,
for something that you buy. I understand.
Yeah. But trade is really between individuals, not between countries, and that's the big fallacy.
If the countries allowed that to take place.
The countries get in the way of
yes,
trade.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, so then the other exception we have in Adam Smith and through today in economics is the infant industry argument, and this is a big one. Let's say, and goes back the solar panels today and automobiles and steel is. Let's say that you have an industry that is new. Let's say that, for example, India is now starting to produce steel. They want to join the steel market. They want to industrialize. So they then put trade barriers against foreign importations of steel so that they can build up their local capacity. And that's called the infant industry argument.
When a country has a industry that it feels is important that it wants to enrich within its country.
Exactly.
Let's help that industry survive because it can't make it on its own.
Exactly.
I see.
Yeah, that's the infant industry argument, and that's called the second best solution. Helping the infant industry argument, second best solution. And I asked the economist at a History of Economic Thought Society, or at the Summer Institute for the History of Economic Thought one summer, maybe like 10 years ago. I said, can you give me an example of when a country put in an infant industry argument to support a local industry and then took away those trade protections and allowed them to compete in the international market? He couldn't give me an example. So once we put in infant industry protectionism against the smaller Japanese imports of automobiles in the 70s, and we still have huge
more Japanese cars than
huge trade barriers against Japanese cars. So once you put in this infant industry protectionism, it never goes away. And Adam Smith had a very unique take on this infant industry argument. He thought that an entrepreneur, not a monopoly, but an entrepreneur, he didn't use the word entrepreneur, a business person, a commerce person, would go to a country where England had not been doing business and then try to engage in business there. That company should get a temporary monopoly. In other words,
for the effort they put in.
Yeah. For that's called a demonstration project or a market failure. It's a market failure because the market hadn't been there before. Therefore, we need to give them special protection to allow them to get their feet on the ground.
And that would motivate them to someone to reach out.
Exactly, and that's the same reason he argues for intellectual property, is to motivate people to innovate. But notice how that goes back to imperialism. So here he is granting people he's against monopolies in general, but he wants to grant short-term monopolies for people to engage into imperialistic business.
Just a little tweak of the freedom.
So when is this
little intervention?
When does this stuff end? Okay, and then the third one, and this goes back to my friend who I saw in Valencia who didn't like the fact that China imports much more than into the United States than they buy from the United States. So he came up with this third intervention, which is to have a tax on imports from countries that don't buy your stuff. Right?
I mean, it sounds reasonable on the surface.
But again, who decides with what knowledge and where does it end?
Right.
And so my friend had this saying, well, we should tax Chinese imports. And here he was supposed to be a free trader, free market economist, and he's asking for more taxes. See what I mean? So Adam Smith had this idea of charging for imports which compete against national industries, and that's in Adam Smith. I don't have time to look it up and talk about it now because I guess we should wrap up. But this is just an example of some of the research I'm doing on Adam Smith.
It's fascinating, and it's educational, and it kind of makes me think about just contemporary current events counterparts to these same arguments. These fallacies are still being still being bounced around. So
like I said, it's all in Adam Smith.
We have only a few seconds left, so. Have any final words for us on your research?
Yeah, well, just that we should not deify, reify people because everyone has their own interests at stake.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching Hardfire. Thanks for coming, Cameron.
You're welcome, Derek.
Also,
Nice
please
to
check
talk
out
with
our
you.
more than 150 other episodes available online.